Super Bowl 50 was the night Peyton Manning walked off the field at Levi Stadium with one last Lombardi trophy.
I'm very excited to begin the next chapter of my playing career for the Denver Broncos.
For a brief moment, Denver Broncos football looked like they'd be great for a while. They just watched a Hall of Fame quarterback cap off one of the greatest careers the game has ever seen, and everything felt like a solid foundation for the future. The thing is, it wasn't. What followed that championship was nearly a decade of quarterback misery that most fans try to forget. One rookie from Oregon stopped all that. We're going to be going over exactly how the curse even began to begin with and how Bo Nix ended it. On March 7, 2016, Peyton Manning stood at a podium and announced his retirement. He talked about his daughter in scripture and gave one last Omaha call to the crowd before he left. After 18 seasons and 5 MVP awards, one of the most decorated quarterbacks in NFL history walked out the door, but the Broncos front office had no real answer for what came next. Their defense was legitimately historic, and this was the same unit that just held Cam Newton and the Panthers to 10 points in the Super Bowl. With guys like Von Miller, Chris Harris, and TJ Ward, the group was built to win right now. Yet the team at the top of the mountain had no idea who would be taking their next snap. On paper, Brock Osweiler was supposed to be the answer for the franchise. He stepped in for Manning during the 2015 regular season when Peyton's foot gave out, and he managed to go 5-2 as a starter. The Broncos were 7-0 before Manning started to struggle, and Osweiler looked capable enough during his stretch of games. He wasn't elite by any means, but he was 6'7" with a big arm and had spent multiple years learning under Manning. The front office thought some of that greatness would have rubbed off on him by then. The tape showed it hadn't, but Denver never actually got a chance to find out because Brock took the money and ran. The Houston Texans offered him a 4-year deal worth $72 million in free agency, and you really can't blame the guy for taking that kind of life-changing money. He only had 8 career starts in the NFL, yet suddenly he was one of the 20 highest paid players in the entire league. Denver could have tried harder to match the offer or keep him around, but they simply didn't move fast enough. Brock was gone and the franchise was left scrambling before the ink was even dry on Peyton's retirement papers. The team went into the 2016 draft with a massive problem on their hands. Their answer was Payton Lynch, a quarterback out of Memphis who they took 26 overall in the first round. Lynch was a big kid with a live arm who looked like a project with a high ceiling. The plan was to sit him for a year and learn the system, but that timeline assumed Denver would stay competitive while he figured things out. That assumption was wrong from day one. Brock Osweiler only lasted 1 year in Houston from being awful start to finish. He managed to throw 16 interceptions before getting benched halfway through the season for Tom Savage, which shows you exactly how bad he truly was. While Houston was dealing with that mess, Denver started cycling through quarterbacks at a pace that gave the entire fan base whiplash. Trevor Siemien was an undrafted free agent that the Broncos had stashed on the roster, but he surprised everyone by winning the starting job at a camp in 2016. To his credit, Siemien was serviceable for a while, starting 25 games over 2 seasons, finishing with a 13-11 record. He never embarrassed the team, but being just okay doesn't cut it when your championship window is slamming shut and the defense is getting older by the second. The real problem was that Payton Lynch could never get out of his own way on or off the field. Injuries derailed his second season before he even got moving, and he looked completely inconsistent whenever he actually got reps. Denver waited 2 years for a breakout that never happened before they finally cut him loose and moved on. It's wild to think that the 26th pick produced 0 wins as a starter for the Broncos. If they had used that pick on almost anybody else, they might have extended the life on that elite team, but instead, they got nothing. That legendary defense Manning rode into retirement was falling apart while the front office scrambled for answers. Aqib Talib left in free agency and TJ Ward got released, so the core pieces of that Super Bowl 50 roster were walking out the door one by one. The franchise kept rolling out quarterbacks who had no business starting in the NFL, and by the time the Lynch experiment ended in 2018, that championship unit was just a memory. Denver wasted the entire window without a real plan for the future, which leads us to the next phase of the struggle. They no longer wanted a young, inexperienced player that they were betting on would finally hit, so they went back to the market to find a veteran. Case Keenum signing with the Broncos in 2018 actually made a lot of sense. He was just coming off a 22 touchdown season with the Vikings while leading them all the way to the NFC Championship game. Everyone remembers the Minneapolis Miracle, and at that time it looked like Keenum had finally figured out how to be a high-level starter. Denver gave him a 2-year deal worth $36 million, and the fans were genuinely optimistic because they thought they were getting a guy at his absolute peak. The thing is, the 2017 Vikings had a much better setup than the 2018 Broncos, and Case looked like a completely different player without that supporting cast. He finished the year 6-10 with 18 touchdowns and 15 interceptions, while the offense stalled out on almost every single week. For every game where he looked like he might be the guy, there was another where the team couldn't move the ball at all. Denver released him after just 1 season, which served as a brutal reminder that a player's environment matters just as much as their talent. Next up was Joe Flacco, who arrived via trade from Baltimore in March of 2019 for a 4th-round pick. Flacco was a former Super Bowl MVP with a huge arm and plenty of playoff experience, so it felt like a reasonable swing for a team in transition. However, Joe was already 34 years old, and a neck injury ended his season after only 8 games. He finished his short stint in Denver with a 2-6 record and only 6 touchdowns, and the team moved on before the next offseason even started. Drew Lock got 2 completely different opportunities during the stretch, but the results were always the same in the end. He clearly had the arm talent to make big plays that got you excited, but he would immediately follow them up with a decision that made you want to look away. In 2020, he started 13 games and threw 16 touchdowns against a league-leading 15 interceptions, ending the year with a 4-9 record. Teddy Bridgewater signed in 2021 and became the perfect symbol for how stagnant this era of Broncos football had become. He was steady and safe, the kind of quarterback who doesn't lose you the game, but definitely doesn't go out of their way and win it for you either. His 7-7 record as a starter sounds fine until you realize the roster was talented enough to do way more than that. Teddy Two Gloves put up decent numbers with 18 touchdowns and 7 picks, but the offense lacked any real explosiveness or the ability to scare defense deep. The pattern just kept repeating itself like a loop that the front office couldn't break. A new name would arrive at a hopeful press conference, we would see a few flashes in September, and then the reality would set in by the time winter rolled around. Denver was stuck in a cycle of shopping for bargains and reclamation projects that never actually moved the needle. The roster was getting thinner every year while they burned resources on the quarterback position without actually fixing the underlying issue. After years of trying to find a cheap fix, the front office finally decided it was time to stop thinking small and make a massive move. In March of 2022, the Denver Broncos decided to push all their chips in. They sent out 2 first-round picks, 2 second-round picks, a 4th-round pick, Shelby Harris, Drew Lock, and a few other players in order to get Russell Wilson. He had 9 Pro Bowls and a Super Bowl ring while being known as one of the most efficient passers of his generation. The trade sent shockwaves through the entire league, and Denver fans lost their minds in the best possible way. Broncos country, let's ride, became the rallying cry for the guy who, before he even took a snap, in orange and blue. The introductory press conference felt like a massive turning point for the franchise. Wilson stood at the podium and talked about winning championships and building a legacy in the place where it all could come together. It was exactly what a fan base starved for real quarterback play needed to hear, and for a few months, it was easy to believe the hype. Then the actual season started. Nathaniel Hackett had been hired as a head coach the same offseason after serving as the offensive coordinator for the Green Bay Packers. The big pitch was that his connection to Wilson would allow him to build a scheme around the quarterback's strengths to create a dominant unit. What actually happened was one of the worst offensive performances by a talented roster in recent memory, and Denver finished dead last in points scored for the 2022 season. A team with Wilson under center and Courtland Sutton at receiver somehow couldn't figure out how to move the ball, and the clock management was so bad it became a national punchline. Russ looked nothing like the player who had carved up the NFC West for a decade, and the offense seemed to have no idea how to function without him going off script. They finished with a 5-12 record, which led Hackett to getting fired the day after Christmas. So Denver went out and spent even more to fix the mess. They traded another first-round pick to the New Orleans Saints to bring in Sean Payton as the head coach in February 2023. Getting out of the Nat Hackett situation cost a premium pick on top of everything they had already surrendered for Russ. At this point in time, the Broncos were operating like a team that had maxed out every credit card and was applying for new ones just to stay current on the old payments. Payton's first season with Wilson showed some real flashes. There were stretches where the offense looked functional, and Russ had a few games where he resembled his old self. His touchdown to interception ratio improved as the team went 8-9. Still, the offense was choppy and inconsistent in a way that suggested the problem was not just the coaching. Russ had lost his edge, and the burst that let him extend plays and create magic off schedule was clearly diminished. Denver benched Wilson for the final 2 games of the 2023 season to make sure his injury guarantees didn't kick in. After that, the relationship was over, and Wilson left with $85 million in dead cap money attached to his departure. That figure was a record at the time, and it would hang over Denver's books for a full 2 seasons after he was gone. When you add it all up, the Wilson era cost the Broncos 3 first-round picks, 2 second-round picks, 3 players, and $85 million in dead money. The result was multiple consecutive losing seasons and 0 playoff appearances for a franchise that went from Super Bowl champion to a salary cap cautionary tale in just a few years. Denver finally had to make a real decision in the upcoming draft, instead of just trying to put out another fire. The 2024 NFL draft was supposed to be a generational draft for quarterbacks, and it delivered on that promise early. Caleb Williams went 1st overall to Chicago, Jaden Daniels went 2nd to Washington, and Drake May went 3rd to New England. 3 quarterbacks were off the board in the first 3 picks while Denver sat at 12, watching the top of the class vanish before they could even blink. What came next would define the next decade of Broncos football, and Sean Payton knew the stakes were as high as they get. The draft board kept moving fast as the draft continued. Michael Penix shockingly went 8th to Atlanta since the Falcons had just signed Kirk Cousins. J.J. McCarthy went 10th to Minnesota, which meant 5 quarterbacks were gone before Denver was even on the clock. The room had to decide what they actually believed about the guy left on the board, and they had to ignore the optics and the outside noise to make the call. Sean Payton believed in Bo Nix, though. The criticism started before the pick was even announced. Nix was 24 years old at the time of the draft, which made him 2 or 3 years older than most prospects. He had played 61 college games across 2 different programs, and that was a number no quarterback in NCAA history had ever reached before. The skeptics used that experience against him by claiming he was a finished product with too much mileage and no real upside. People had him pegged as a 2nd or 3rd round talent who was only getting drafted because of his stats against Pac-12 competition. What Peyton saw when he watched the tape was different. At Oregon in 2023, Nix completed over 67% of his passes to set an NCAA record. He threw 45 touchdowns and only 3 interceptions, but his most important trait wasn't the flashy numbers. Sean Payton had spent an entire coaching career building offenses around quarterbacks who could make the right pre-snap read, and Nix fit that mold perfectly. By the time the Broncos drafted Bo, he had already handled more public failure and criticism than most NFL veterans see in a career. Denver picked Bo Nix 12th overall, and the football world collectively shrugged. Nobody outside of that Denver draft room thought they had found the answer to a 9-year question, but Payton was willing to bet his reputation on it. During his 2024 season, Bo Nix threw 29 total touchdowns, which is one of the highest ever for a rookie QB. Denver finished the year 10-7 to make the playoffs for the first time since Super Bowl 50, ending a 9-year drought that felt much longer than the numbers suggest. Those 9 years of misery we just walked through were finally over, and the Broncos got back to the postseason because a 24-year-old rookie who most experts had written off before he even took a professional snap. Bo stayed calm in ways that none of the guys before him could manage, and he refused to force throws into dangerous coverage when the play started to break down. Instead of locking onto his first read and waiting to get hit, he moved through his progressions and used his legs to buy time or pick up easy yards. Sean Payton had spent 2 years watching his quarterbacks make the wrong decisions at the worst possible time, but now he had a guy who consistently made the right one. That isn't just a small improvement for an offense. In this league, that's the whole thing. Denver entered the playoffs as a wild card that year and lost in the first round, but the foundation for the future was set. A rookie quarterback took a roster that was still dealing with the financial mess of the Wilson era and turned them into a winning football team. They weren't a fluky team that got lucky a few times, but rather a group that competed every single week and came back in games they had no business winning. They finished with a winning record that nobody outside of Colorado saw coming, and then year 2 arrived. That was when the Broncos stopped being a nice story and became a legitimate threat to the rest of the league. The 2025 season resulted in a 14-3 record, which was the best mark in the entire AFC. Denver earned the top seed and home field advantage throughout the playoffs, while Nix led the offense from the first snap of September all the way through the end of the year. Across his first 2 seasons, both put together 7-game winning drives, which is more than any other 2024 quarterback had in their first 2 years besides Caleb Williams. The divisional round against Buffalo was the game where everything finally clicked for the fans. Bo Nix and Josh Allen played both in the 2024 wildcard match that sent the Broncos home a year earlier. Everyone knows Josh is one of the best players in the league, so nobody in that stadium needed a reminder of what he could do to a defense. But Bo matched them possession for possession and made big throws when they mattered the most, eventually leading a game-winning drive and OT that sent the home crowd into a frenzy. During that final drive, Nix actually fractured a bone in his right ankle, but he stayed on the field anyway. He finished the drive to win the game, and the full picture of his injury only became clear after the final whistle blew. That single moment tells you everything you need to know about the gap between what this team had at quarterback for a decade and what they have now. The guy who finally broke the curse literally broke his ankle doing it and refused to come out the game. Denver moved on to the AFC Championship game, but they ended up losing that matchup. Nix had to watch from the sideline as backup Jarrett Stidham just couldn't replicate what the starter had been doing all season. Even with that loss, the story of the season doesn't change. Going from a wild card in year 1 to the number 1 seed in year 2 wasn't a fluke, and winning playoff games for the first time since 2015 isn't an accident. The Broncos spent nearly a decade proving that quarterback is the only position in football that truly matters when you look at the big picture. They went through 8 different starters and paid hundreds of millions of dollars to players who weren't even on the team anymore. They gave up 2 first-round picks to Seattle that they can never replace, all just to get back to the same starting line where Peyton Manning had left them. Bo Nix didn't fix every problem overnight, and he certainly didn't play a perfect game every week. However, he walked into a broken situation without flinching, and 2 years later, the Broncos were playing for a chance to go to the Super Bowl. So there you have it. Subscribe if you're new, and watch this next video if you haven't already. Thanks for watching.